Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists got it right. This is Tom Navolis, your host, and this is the first program of January of 2023. I am very delighted that you are here with me again. I was going to take and speak to something in relationship to what's been happening this last week around the federal House of Representatives and what has been going on in relationship to the election of a Speaker of the House. So many ways I could go into a few things. I'm going to highlight just a couple of points and not spend a lot of time because I want to get into, as I noted in the newsletter, I want to get into the article written by Montezuma because I think that article clearly talks to and is virtually predictive. As I always say, the Anti-Federalist predicted our situation right now in so many ways. The parallels in history are not even uncanny. What they are is those parallels in history. Because, as I always will say, we are a sinful people. Government is not going to be a salvation to our ills. That is why I stay on the idea of political theology is my theme. Because right now, it comes down to those belief systems. And more so, what I want you to understand, especially you that are called or call yourselves conservatives, you need to get a perspective of the conservative movement that I have not found anybody else to explain any better than Dr. Gary North. There's a link there at the website over my shoulder if you're watching on the program at samueladamsreturns.net. And that link will take you into the history of the conservative movement. And we are in a mess that we're seeing because of what Montezuma, we're going to get into that because I'm not going to belabor this debacle in so many different ways of the speaker race. What I am going to look at is how Montezuma takes and reviews the aristocracy in America and sees it formed very much so from the position of the Senate and the corruption of the House into a like environment, if you will, a like kind, a mini-me in so many different ways. I want to mention two things, though, in relationship to this mess, is that it's all about the power brokers. Some people think it's about the lobbyists and all of that. Because I have to have this program into the producers early, and it takes me a lot of time to post-process, because once again, I'll let you know, this is a whole production by one person, and all of those that have programs like myself that do one-person programs, you clearly understand all the effort that goes into it, both on the front end and the back end. So the post-processing is the back end, so that people are clear about what that is. Now, when it comes to the research that I've done, I spent too much time, quite frankly, going to look at who the power brokers are. But as we're seeing at the time of this recording, is that the conservative caucus is really making a good push. The Liberty Caucus, whatever they call themselves, are making that grand push. They're doing the right thing. In fact, they're the only ones that Montezuma even talks about in some ways, lightly referred to. They're going to be the ones that are there fighting for liberty, and they're the ones that are going to be drawing on the names of extremists. To that point, the two things I want to mention before I run out of time here, but we're going to emphasize Montezuma's letter in the second and third segments, and obviously I'll be making commentary on that to bring that relationship of modern history to play. But as I looked at this, and early in, let's say back in Tuesday time frame, you had the former governor of Ohio, who he calls himself a moderate, but to me he's a Democrat. He's a liberal power broker, is John Kasich. And to that extent, he put out a tweet saying a block of House Republicans should get together with Democrats to pick a speaker to run a coalition government, which will moderate the House and marginalize the extremists. You see, that's about power within that structure. Now, there's two groups that ended up negotiating on Wednesday night, and those two groups were, again, power brokers, the Club for Growth, and then the Congressional Leadership Fund, the CLF. Now, quick highlights, and you can go to the Ballotpedia links on those two organizations and their websites in particular. But the Club for Growth is very much a limited government, free market, lower taxes. They would be called, I don't know if you could even call them the conservatives in modern terms, according to Gary North, or you look at them as edging on that classical liberal perspective. And the classical liberals were good. Don't get that wrong. Classical liberals are a very formidable means of thinking politically, culturally, socially, and definitely economically. So they were able to cut a deal with what is called the Congressional Leadership Fund. The Congressional Leadership Fund, quite frankly, was started by John Boehner. So now you have Boehner and Kasich are one of like mind. Okay, you got to get that real clear. And they're both, in my perspective, liberals that are all about power. So what the Club for Growth was able to do, and I'll read you real quick what it says in the news release, the press release, is that the CLF, which is the Congressional Leadership Fund, started by Boehner, and Club for Growth come to key agreement in support of Kevin McCarthy for Speaker. So the Congressional Leadership Fund, an independent super PAC, endorsed Kevin McCarthy, and the Club for Growth reached agreement on support for Speaker Kevin McCarthy. So the statement from the CLF president, Dan Constan, reads like this. Kevin McCarthy has effectively led House Republicans from the minority to the majority, and we want to see him continue to lead the party so we can pick up seats for the third cycle in a row. CLF will not spend in any open seat primaries in safe Republican districts, and CLF will not grant resources to other super PACs to do so. CLF has never spent $1 against a Republican incumbent before, and obviously will continue that policy in the future. CLF will continue to support incumbents in primaries as well as challengers in districts that affect the majority, which proved to be critical to winning the majority in 2022. A statement from Club for Growth President David McIntosh. This agreement on the super PACs fulfills a major concern we have pressed for. We understand that Leader McCarthy and members are working on a rules agreement that will meet the principles we have set out previously. Assuming these principles are met, Club for Growth will support Kevin McCarthy for Speaker. You're going to have to look at the article that are in the references at SamuelAdamsReturns.net for this program, because it goes through a number of those agreements as were brought to the floor yesterday. Now, We shall see whether more rule changes, and this is what's critical. You think that people just get together to do and make laws and pass bills and all of that. It's not how it works, folks. The gaming, as I call it, is all established in the rules. The rules which the Constitution says that the Congress, the House, and the Senate can make their own rules as how they will function. Maybe I'll have to do a program on that. I'll think about that. That may be something I follow up with next week, is because it's complex. It's not what people think it is. You don't know how your government operates. And the rules that are in place in both the House and the Senate determine how things are governed. Well, enough of that. That's really all I have to say, is that it was the power brokers that are constantly coming together, and there is a fabulous push on by those who are the real conservatives, those that really care about the constituents, about the Constitution, to push for the rule changes so that you can take and govern well, cut taxes, do all of those things that we want them to actually do. So let's do an introduction of Montezuma, as we take and we look at this. Oh, one last thing I want to say. All right, so we'll finish this segment out talking about speakership, because I do bring out how the power brokers work. So Kasich and his crew, what they were able to do in Ohio is knock out the conservative person that was running for Speaker of the House in Ohio. I mean, the real constitutional conservative. They knocked him out, and he didn't. Kasich and crew brought in this other person at the last minute to take and run for Speaker. And then what happens is that all of a sudden, because there were negotiations going on with the Democrats, that you had a large number of Democrats that crossed over and voted for the Kasich / DeWine person for Speaker. You have to remember that the Speaker of the House determines what bills get to the floor for a vote. So it's really a mess. There's some notes in there for you in the newsletter. If you don't get the newsletter, please sign up for it at samueladamsreturns.net. You can do that right away, either when you get into the website, or there's a place to sign up in a column on the right-hand side for you to get that newsletter. But, you know, the bottom line is that you can see these power brokers don't want the true conservatism. They do not want true changes in the power structure on how they do things. Oh, and what's most critical in here is that the Democrat that ended up for Ohio, the minority leader, what they're looking at in particular is that this Kasich speaker will work with them on redistricting. And remember that I brought out, and those that take the Ohio Constitution class will know for sure, is that Ohio was manipulated by the left, even in our constitutional amendment that changed the mechanism for apportionment so that redistricting will be moving in the favor such that Ohio could very well be turned into a blue state. Now, having a speaker willing to work with already a corrupt amendment in a constitution and work with the Democrats to forward that, to move that forward, I'm sorry, Ohio, you're a mess. So in these last few seconds, let's look at this. Let's take a thought from our anti-federalist and come back in the next segment to really dig into what it is. Why did the Anti-Federalists predict what we have today? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment. And this is going to take that dive into the article written by an anti-federalist calling himself Montezuma. This was written 17 October 1787. So this is virtually right after the constitutional paperwork was able to get out to the various states, get published, and so on. I'm calling it a satire on the elitists who think they know how to govern best. And that's what we have. When you listen to Gary North and the history of the conservative movement, you'll see that even now, the likes of Kasich and Boehner and many of the establishment believe that they are the elite that can govern. They are the central planners, and that's very well discussed in that series on the conservative movement, the history of the conservative movement. What does that mean? This was predicted where we are in that relationship, that we would have the central planning, that we would have even those that would think of themselves as Jeffersonian. They're not. They are not. There's very, very few. There's those 20 in that Liberty Conference, as I call them, that they're the ones that are stick-toing what does it mean to function as a republic instead of a consolidated government. And this is Anti-Federalist number 9, and it is called, it's titled by Montezuma in this case, or titled at least in this compilation of the Anti-Federalist papers, a consolidated government is a tyranny. It is. And that's what we have. We have tyranny that is going on, especially the way that this president and his administration is running everything. But it is brought to you from the time of the implementation of our Constitution. So without further upfront comment, I want you to know that when you go to SamuelAdamsReturns.net, you can download this. I have put my emphasis in here with parentheses and emphasis using underlines and italics. I've done a number of that. So anything that looks different than the normal font that's there, that's where I'm trying to get you to pay attention to those words, because they relate to our present in so many different ways. I also will stop and give some of my interjection. I just can't help doing that. And hopefully we cover it all in this next two segments. Now, according to the way that things work, there's about 1,900 words. That means that 150 words a minute. Yeah, we should get through it in the next, 28 minutes, 30 minutes, or whatever we have across the two different segments. So without any further comment at the moment up front, let's get into this here. So this is the article by Montezuma, who was regarded as a Pennsylvanian and wrote the essay, which showed up in the Independent Gazette October 17th, 1787. We, the aristocratic party, the elite in commerce, education, and political governance of the United States, lamenting the many inconveniences to which the late Confederation subjected the well-born and better kind of people. The Federalism and the Confederation, bringing them down to the level of rabble, those middle-class crafts and small businesses, and holding in utter detestation that frontispiece, that facade to every Bill of Rights that all men are born equal. beg, earnestly implore you to leave, to commit for the purpose of drawing a line between such as we think were ordained to govern and such as were made to bear the weight of government without having any share in its administration, to submit to our friends in the first class for the inspection the following defense of our monarchical, aristocratical democracy. All right, I got to interject in here. So the way that he's opening this up is about the political elite, which I look at as the establishment, and that's the establishment Republicans, the establishment conservatives are all the political elite, and you lump them into the aristocratic party. Now, he's looking at this from the Senate perspective, and then he's focusing down to the House. And you're going to be surprised at what he says about the foolishness of a Bill of Rights. A foolishness of a Bill of Rights, what that means. And that they're the ones that can handle the administration, the weight of government. They can do that, the aristocrats. And that what he wants is he wants to hand this over for those that really should be inspecting this, is to defend the monarchical and aristocratical democracy. All right? Now we're going to continue in this. And first consideration, first, as a majority of all societies consist of men who, though totally incapable of thinking or acting in governmental matters, are more readily led than driven. We have thought meet, which means suitable, proper, or qualified, but convenient, to indulge them in something like a democracy in the new Constitution, which we have designated by the popular name of the House of Representatives. But to guard against every possible danger from this lower house, we have subjected every bill they bring forward to the double negative of our upper house and president. Nor have we allowed the populace the right to elect their representatives annually, lest this body should be too much under the influence and control of their constituents, and thereby prove the weatherboard of our grand edifice. Its splendid structure, the great structure that they're putting together, to show the shiftings of every fashionable gale. For we have not yet to learn that little else is wanting to aristocratize the most democratical representative than to make him somewhat independent of his political creators. Stop right there. Once again, here it is, this predictive plan, this predictive idea that they're able, that Montezuma, this writer from Pennsylvania, is able to deduce from reading the Constitution of 87, no amendments, but to see that what was happening in the past is that there were elections every year for representatives. And that meant that they were close or had to be close to the people. And what they did here is taking and saying, oh no, we're going to have this control mechanism in place. We're going to let the people think. Remember, they are led. They can't think for themselves, but they can be led. And we can indulge them in this whole manner of making them think they have something like a democracy in this new Constitution. And we're going to call it the House of Representatives. So what does it look like today? Look at the House of Representatives. Look at how it functions. Look at what we have in tyranny and what we have in central planning, what we have in those elite and taking multi-millions of dollars to elect someone to the House of Representatives. Wow. All right, let's continue. Otherwise, you'll have me speaking for the next 30 minutes or so about this area just in itself. But I just want to say, see how now in 2023, the Senate is still held by the establishment elites, and the House is in disarray because they have what? They have been subjected. Every bill is looked at on a double negative, but more so, the populace. What is it about the populace? They no longer have influence and control over their representatives. The constituents do not have that. And you're saying that's by design. That would eventually happen because of the Constitution, especially, as I always say, when you have self-serving, power-mongering people that get elected. So I still continue to cheer those 20 that are fighting there in the House of Representatives to change the rules so that good legislation, the tyranny can be stomped on, the tyranny can be minimized within the context of what we have going on right now. So picking up again Montezuma, we have taken away that rotation of appointment which has so long perplexed us, that grand engine of popular influence. Every man is eligible into our government from time to time for life. This will have a twofold good effect. First, it prevents the representatives from mixing with the lower class and imbibing, which means receiving or retaining, their foolish sentiments with which they would have come charged on re-election. So either being elected or re-elected, the people, you're not getting that influence. You don't have that influence. The idea of what they're doing is a good effect. And the first good effect is to prevent the representatives from mixing with the lower class. Congressmen show up from time to time. They go to all the big events, but they do not receive or retain. They do not get imbibed with what these elitists, these aristocrats, are calling foolish sentiments. They're not going to take that back to the House of Representatives after they get reelected. They're not going to charge back there and put that into play. Of course not. No way. It's amazing. So in the last 2 minutes, we're going to start point number 2 that Montezuma brings out. They will form the perpetuity of office be under our eye, and in a short time will think and act like us, independently of popular whims and prejudices. For the assertion that, quote, that evil communications corrupt good manners, end quote, is not more true than its reverse. That means the opposite of that. It's amazing how they already are using the duplicity of words, what he's bringing out there. And I call this a satire because he's talking about the establishment, whether that's in the Senate, and that's what he's looking down from that perspective, but at the same time, once again, gets right to the point that that whole area of the House of Representatives will be under the eye of the elite, and in a short time will think and act like the elite. They'll have no independent popular influence, no independent popular prejudices on how to run the government. My friends, we're going to take this forward into the third segment, but we are going to talk about how they are allowing this House certain powers, and what does that mean, and how does it then take into the Senate. So what we have is this predictive state. Did they understand socialism? It wasn't called that. at that time. Sam Adams actually wrote about socialism in so many different ways. So come on back in the next segment as we follow up with Sam Adams Returns. Welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, in this case, Montezuma, got it absolutely correct. And the parallels in history are just amazing when we really pay attention to what was written and we pay attention to the details of the wording. And so in this satire, if you will, was a fabulous analysis of the Constitution of 87. So let me continue on and pick up from where I left off the last time. And that what we were talking about is that we have allowed the House a power to impeach, but we have tenaciously reserved the right to try. So this is from the perspective of the Senate. We hope, gentlemen, you will see the policy of this clause. For what matters it who accuses. What they're saying, what does it matter? Who accuses? If the accused is tried by his friends. In fine, in a delightful way, this plebeian house will have little power, and that little be rightly shaped by our house of gentlemen, who will have a very extensive influence. And again, he's referring to the Senate and the establishment will have the great influence. But again, he said the plebeian, the people, will have little power. From their being chosen out of the gentler class, which it's not true anymore. We don't have the gentler class. As I mentioned earlier, it takes millions, it takes money, it takes the elite to get elected. So from being chosen out of the gentler class, it is true. Every third senatorial seat is to be vacated dual annually, but 2/3 of this influential body will remain in office and be ready to direct or, if necessary, bring over to the good old way the younger members, if the old ones should not be returned. Interesting. You have to remember the 17th Amendment was not in place. The senators were being chosen by the state legislatures at this time. So they were already predetermining that for a new senator, they would try and mold them, bring them over to the older way. And I have to comment is that gentler class was, this higher class of people, how the senators, the gentlemen, and who they would be. But when you look at this, and whereas many of our brethren, from a laudable desire to support their rank in life above the commonality, have not only deranged their finances, but subjected their persons to indecent treatment as being arrested for debt. We have framed a privilege clause by which they may laugh at the fools who trusted them. This is about the Senate. And you have to go back in and look at the Constitution in regards to the Senate and how exclusive they have established this, and from the fact that they have taken and protected both the House and the Senate from virtually ill-doing. And that's why we have the multimillionaires that we have when people leave office. There's a nice video clip that's in the references on how they become millionaires and can get away with it. But we have given out that this clause was provided only that the members might be able, without interruption, to deliberate on the important business of their country. We have frequently endeavored to effect our respective states, the happy discrimination which pervades the system, but finding we could not bring the states into it individually, we have determined, and have taken pains to leave the legislature of each free and independent state, as they now call themselves, in such a situation that they will eventually be absorbed by our grand continental vortex, or dwindle into petty corporations and have power over little else than yoking hogs or determining the width of a cartwheel. Pretty much where the states are right now, except for Florida, who's really taking back the idea of what it means to be a federal independent state. Most states are nothing but dwindled into that vortex, and they're nothing but little petty corporations. But aware that an intention to annihilate state legislatures would be objected to our favorite scheme, we have made their existence as a board of electors necessary to ours. This furnishes us and our advocates with a fine answer to any clamors that may be raised on the subject. Little did they know at this point that the state's influence would be destroyed by the 17th Amendment. Yes, the state legislatures, that was what they were afraid of. The state legislature influence over the positions of the Senate now has been destroyed by the 17th Amendment. Let me continue. We have so interwoven continental and state legislatures, that's the federal and state legislatures, that they cannot exist separately. Whereas we, in truth, only leave them the power of electing us. For what can be a provincial legislature do when we possess the exclusive regulation of external and internal commerce, excise, duties, imposts, post offices, and roads? When we and we alone have the power to wage war, make peace, coin money, if we can get bullion, if not, borrow money, organize the militia and call them forth to execute our decrees and crush insurrections, assisted by a noble body of veterans subject to our nod, which we have the power of raising and keeping even in the time of peace. What have we to fear from state legislatures or even from states when we are armed with such powers with the president at our head? A name we thought proper to adopt in conformity to the prejudices of a silly people who are so foolishly fond of a Republican government that we were obliged to accommodate in names and forms to them in order more effectually to secure the substance of our proposed plan. But we all know that Cromwell was a king with the title of protector. I repeat it. What have we to fear armed with such powers, with a president at our head who is Captain General of the Army, Navy, and militias of the United States, who can make and unmake treaties, appoint and commission ambassadors and other ministers, who can grant or refuse reprieves and pardons, who can make judges of the Supreme and other continental courts. In short, who will be the source, the fountain of honor, profit, and power, whose influence, like the rays of the sun, will diffuse itself far and wide, will exhale all democratical vapors and break the clouds of popular insurrection. But again, gentlemen, our judicial power is a strong work, a masked battery, few people see the guns we can and will ere long play off from it. For the judicial power embraces every question which can arise in law or equity. Under this Constitution and under the laws of the United States, which laws will be, the supreme laws of the land. This power extends to all cases affecting ambassadors or public ministers, and counsels to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be party, to controversies between two or more states, between a state and a citizen of another state, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state, claiming lands under grants of different states, and between a state of the citizen thereof and foreign states, citizens, or subjects. Now, can a question arise in the colonial courts which the ingenuity and sophistry, that fallacious argument of an able lawyer may not bring within one or another above cases? Certainly not. Then our court will have original or appellate jurisdiction in all cases. And if so, how fallen are state judicators? And must not every provincial law yield to our supreme fiat? Our Constitution answers yes. And finally, we shall entrench ourselves so as to laugh at the cabals of commonality. A few regiments will do it first. It must be spread abroad that they are absolutely necessary to defend the frontiers. Now a regiment and then a legion must be added quietly. By and by, a frigate or two must be built, still taking care to intimate that they are essential to the support of our revenue laws and to prevent smuggling. We have said nothing about bills of rights, for we reviewed it as an eternal clog upon our design, as a lock chain to the wheels of government. Though, by the way, as we have not insisted on rotation in our offices, the simile of a wheel is ill. We have for some time considered the freedom of the press as a great evil. It spreads information and begets licentiousness in the people, which needs the rein more than the spur. Besides, a daring printer may expose the plans of government and lessen the consequence of our president and senate. For these and many other reasons, we have said nothing with respect to the rights of the people to speak and publish their sentiments or about the palladiums of liberty and such stuff. We do not much like that sturdy privilege of the people, the right to demand a writ of habeas corpus. We have therefore reserved the power of refusing in such cases of rebellion, and we are the judges of what is rebellion. Our friends, we have been assiduous, showing great care and perseverance in representing our federal calamities until at length the people at large, frightened by the gloomy picture on one side and allured by the prophecies of some of our fanciful and visionary adherents on the other, are ready to accept and confirm our proposed government without delay or forms of examination, which was the more to be wished, as they are wholly unfit to investigate the principles or pronounce on the merit of so exquisite a system. Impressed with the conviction that this Constitution is calculated to restrain the influence of power of the lower class. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have to read the rest of this. I am sorry, there's only about another 100 words to go. This is the contempt that Montezuma saw against the liberties of people, to the point that allowed for the destruction of conservatism and classical liberalism, such that we have the tyrannies in today's government. Come on back next week when Sam Adams returns, and we may pick this up and talk more about rules.